Episode 52 of the podcast. This week we're talking about consent. What does consent really mean for us in the grooming setting and the veterinary setting?
You're listening to the Creating Great Grooming Dogs podcast. I'm Chrissy Neumeier-Smith. I'm a certified professional groomer, certified behavior consultant for canines, certified professional dog trainer, and the owner of Happy Critters in Nashua, New Hampshire. And this, my friends and colleagues, is where grooming and training meet.
I want to talk a little bit about consent. It's a term that we're hearing a lot in the dog training world and not as often in the grooming world. So let's gather in, talk about consent. As groomers, we tend to think in terms of dogs not struggling against us. As trainers, we tend to think of dogs willingly doing a taught behavior. As vet techs and medical professionals, we tend to think in terms of getting things done as safely as possible. And I want us all to get onto the same page because we can have it all. Those goals can all be happening at the same time. And first, I really want to clarify that consent doesn't mean wishy-washy, new agey, granola crunchy. All right, believe me, I'm all about the wishy-washy, new agey, granola crunchy. But giving animals space to be ready for us to work with them is a process. It doesn't mean that they're simply choose no nail trims for Bobo ever, and the dog just sassy walks away. Like I decided no nail trims, and that's the end, right? It means that when an animal has concerns, we help them be comfortable with it. That's where training begins. That's where we address the problem at the point of concern and not at the point of struggling. All right. The long-term advantages of consent are that the dog is willing to work with us. And that's huge, right? The dog is aware of what's being done to them. The dog is trusting us to do stuff to them. And make no mistake, grooming and veterinary behaviors are doing things to dogs. It's very different than, say, teaching a dog to do fly ball where they're cooperating with us, but we're doing things to them, things that they don't really understand, things that they're never going to understand the purpose of. I mean, if we do it right, they're willing to do it. And many of the things that we do are actually things that they like. My dogs love being brushed. I used to have cats. My cats loved being brushed. So if we're doing it right and they're consenting and they're willing to play along, we can calmly get them used to things that they might not ever understand the purpose of. And not necessarily crave, okay? But teaching a dog to trust us to do stuff to them, okay? And that's really important. The choices they have are to play along, which is calm, comfortable, and cooperative, or to struggle against us, which is flat and flee or fight. Wow, that's a tongue twister, huh? Flat and flee or flight. Right? So they're either going to work with us or work against us. We'll make that very binary. Work with us or work against us. So if we're teaching them to consent, the issue is to teach them to work with us, so that they can be calm, comfortable, and cooperative. So if the purpose of consent doesn't hit you in the feels, tech talk, right? If it isn't something that you think is a good idea from a pet loving point of view, that's okay. I'm not saying that, this isn't a judgment call about people being bad people or good people, right? But let's also talk about it from a business point of view, because this is, after all, our living. This is how we make our money, right? Dogs that are calm, comfortable, and cooperative, dogs who are willing to play along, dogs who are giving their consent to the things that we are doing to them, are safer to groom. They're easier to groom. They're easier to get beautiful trims on. Their owners can do more at home. Their vets have an easier time working with them when they're at the vet's office. When the dog is older and fragile, they still can be safely groomed. It's simply good business. You and your staff will be safer. You and your staff will be less stressed, right? So even from a business point of view, even if we look past any sort of good feeling, good vibe about teaching dogs to like it, because I think that sometimes that's the point that people resist with. So even if we look past that and we look at this behavior can be taught, this behavior can be identified, we can teach them to be good for it, and it's good business. It affects our bottom line. Those customers send their friends because their dog never gets stressed out at the groomer. When they go to the grooming shop and they see dogs being groomed, they realize that those dogs are not stressing out. right? As a house call groomer, when they observe how I handle their dog, they realize that dog is fine and they tell all of their friends, right? It's simply good business. So when we look at it from a business point of view, let's actually take it to kind of an agricultural point of view, right? What is the bottom line? Fighting with dogs is more work than we have to do. We don't have to do that kind of work. So when we talk about consent, now that we've stripped it from its wishy-washy, I I do want to encourage the wishy-washy. It's okay, but for the naysayers, maybe it's your boss or something who says no, we're just going to push them through it. This dog needs to learn how to do it. If we strip it from that and we take a look and say, all right, I'm going to teach him to be good for it. I also want you to back that up with, because if he's good for it, we have a lifetime of grooming ahead of us. We have a lifetime of owners maybe needing to give ear medications or brush some burrs out of his back end. We have a lifetime of vet visits. We need to teach this dog to be willing and play along, right? We can play along, be calm, comfortable, and cooperative, or we can struggle away, which is I'm going to say that tongue twister again, flatten, flee, or fight. It's easier when I say it slower. But when we look at those things, then it becomes very apparent, oh yeah, we need to help these dogs be good for it. And that doesn't necessarily rest on the groomer. That can be trainers too. As long as what we're doing is we're teaching them to let us do things to them. Now, you might think that that would be really, really easy, but it's a lot of work for a dog. And some of the things that I see trainers working on for consent behaviors aren't necessarily helpful. So, trainers, I want you to think of grooming setting. So, if your consent behavior has to fit the setting it's in, okay, you cannot teach a dog that if they don't want to do something, to just walk away, right? That isn't an option when they are on a grooming table with a grooming loop. That isn't an option when they're in a crate, and that isn't an option when they're tied in a tub. So the just walk away when you don't want to do it or when you're feeling uncomfortable is now no longer available to them. And a dog who may have previously been aggressive might go back to being aggressive when their new start button isn't available. Think of those start button behaviors, and groomers, you might not be aware what a start button behavior is, but it's sort of like I do this action to tell you I'm ready. Okay. In my world as a groomer, all right, my start button, are you ready, is if I'm like, for instance, holding a paw in my hand, if I can open my palm and the dog chooses to keep their foot in my hand, that is consent. That's the start button. It happens at point of contact. It's not some obscure thing that they have to perform. It's not like the easy button. You guys know the Staples easy button. Boop, that was easy. It's not something that they need to do anything large or outrageous for, just that they choose to stay in my hand, or they choose to stand where I place them, or they choose to tilt their head the way that I've directed them. What we want is the posable action figure. So as groomers, what we're looking for is a dog who is going to let us move them around and guide their body into different ways. We're going to ask them to lift feet and move legs, and sometimes we're lifting tails and tilting heads and straightening bodies. Straightening bodies, you might be surprised if you're not a groomer, but many dogs have like kind of a little bit of a lean that they do, and you're trying to get them even when they're perfectly straight. And trying to get that even and getting their neck and their head, you have to move them into a variety of positions. So we need a dog who's going to be posable for us, right? And that's different than just standing and being still, which is why behaviors like chin targeting and nose targeting aren't real helpful. And we'll talk about some of those targeting things in the next part. If you're enjoying my podcast, please remember to subscribe so that you don't miss any episodes. So we talked a little bit about consent, and I started talking a little bit about nose targeting and chin targeting, but let's talk about what those really are. So nose targeting, that's when a trainer might teach a dog to touch their nose to something. It keeps a dog in a position in an area. And that sometimes can be helpful for things like giving a vaccine or brushing or doing a little bit of scissor work. There are some good uses for nose targeting. Chin targeting is similar, where the dog places their chin on something. Sometimes it's a hand, sometimes it's on someone's lap, sometimes it's on a chair, but their chin is placed on something. It's a way to keep a dog still. Here's where it doesn't work well for grooming. First of all, neither of them are good for duration behaviors. There's only so long a dog can comfortably nose target or chin target. And I think that for grooming purposes, it might be helpful at some point while we're building up a larger behavior of simply be relaxed for this. However, if we're doing that for every time we touch a foot, I think that the training world doesn't really understand how many foot touches there are in grooming. We are touching their feet over and over and over and over again. I forget what episode it was, but there was one where I counted out how many foot touches we do before we even get to the trim, right? So first of all, we get them in the tub and it's water, because we're touching them with a sprayer, right? There's water, there's scrubbing with soap, there's water, there's scrubbing with soap, there's water, there's conditioner, there's water, there's towel, there's dryer. There, there's and multiplied by 4 feet, right? So many foot touches, so much that we do that what I'm looking for is more multi-purpose behaviors. Because nose targeting and chin targeting, if we do that every single time we need to touch a foot, as an example for dogs who are worried about their feet, right? It becomes very impractical, right? Like, okay, now we need to have this target available all the time. And chin targeting, I want you to also think too that it can be very difficult to work around faces. We're using sharp tools. I have scissors underneath the chin, and I don't want a dog to enthusiastically bang against something that's underneath their chin, which is part of what I see when trainers are teaching things like nose targeting and chin targeting. If the dog perceives something that they think might be a target and they enthusiastically push into it or lower into it or press into it, that's not good for grooming. So while I do have chin targeting with my dogs, I've taught my dogs nose targeting and chin targeting. I very rarely use it in grooming, but I have also taken the step that so for instance, if I put my hand out, palm up, and don't say chin, that's just my hand out, palm up. The hand out and palm up and saying chin now means to chin target. So they have to have both the physical cue and the verbal cue. Okay, so groomers, if you're following along. All right. So if I'm going to have a dog press their chin in my hand, which is actually a useful behavior for greeting people. It keeps my dogs from jumping up on people and lets people actually pet their head for a second, right? But if you put your hand out, it doesn't necessarily mean place your chin in my hand until I say chin, because I don't want my dog to press their chin into my hand if I'm doing something else. If I'm looking under their chin, there are lots of reasons why I would have my hand under their chin, right? And nose targeting, one of the things I have an issue with nose targeting in the grooming setting, and trainers, this is so that you can start thinking about how we can make these behaviors more adaptable or multi-purpose. One of the things about nose targeting is that sometimes dogs learn to stretch their nose out, or they only do it in one position. Like they don't necessarily nose target something tall or something to the side. If we really want to be able to make it useful for grooming purposes, then we need to be able to move their head around. So we might be able to use it for a back end behavior. But if we're trying to get maybe their ears clean, if you have a neck that is extended and a head that's flattened and extended, it's very hard to get into the ear to clean it. Things that a lot of trainers don't necessarily think about, but vets sure do. Like, oh, we just need him to move his head and adjust his head so that we can get this clean. But a dog that is insisting that, nope, I'm nose targeting, I gotta do the thing, right? And if you raise the thing, they're confused. So if we're using nose targeting, we need to be a little bit more mobile with it. We need to move it around more. We need to raise it up, lower it, turn it to the left, turn it to the right, get them used to the idea that the nose targeting is something that could be in a variety of positions, right? Instead of reaching for it, having it be close, press their body into it, right? Um, but still, not a good endurance behavior. Keep in mind that when we're grooming, we are asking these dogs to stay with us for probably about an hour's worth of hands-on for the average small dog, right? Now I'm doing start to finish in my house call setting because it's not like I just, take another dog out, right? So even when I have multiple dogs in the house, I'm usually doing start to finish. But it's about an hour's worth of time, hands-on for a groomer. And that's the tub time, the drying time, the trimming time, brushing time, right? That's a lot in time if a dog has to do some sort of nose targeting. And nose targeting can be exhausting. And if you don't think so, right now, wherever you are, try to target something, even just with a foot. Okay? You're grooming, maybe you have your headphones on, because of course we all wear ear protection while we're grooming. All wear ear protection while we're grooming, right? Come on, it's 2019. We should all know better. So put your foot down and just try to target that one spot, right? It's really hard. It's mentally taxing to try to hold one spot. And it's a lot to ask of our dogs. So instead, I would like for us to have some more multi-purpose behavior. Because grooming is a touch fest, right? So what kind of things do we need a dog to be able to do? We need them to be able to be touched anywhere. We need them to be able to touch with stuff. And the average dog is living in a home around stuff and being touched, right? So I think sometimes we look at these behaviors they're teaching in zoos, and man, that's so flashy, right? Like, wow, and he put his paw through and we were able to do this to a tiger but our dogs are living with us. They sleep next to us. We're touching them all the time. And a dog that cannot be touched by its owner certainly isn't a candidate for grooming at the moment, right? They're working on an entirely different level of things, right? But I need to be able to safely fall asleep next to my dog on the sofa while we watch a movie. My dogs can be touched, right? Think about that. That's the average Joe. That's their average life. Their dogs are getting touched all the time. So instead of trying to do these very elaborate zoo behaviors, I'm going to call them zoo behaviors, but these very elaborate, targeting and, making it really, really cool that the animal puts its paw out. And we don't need to be as extreme with house pets. They live with us. They have a relationship with humans like no other animal. All right. Even our cats don't have the same relationship that our dogs do with us. They're different. Also, as fun. God, I love cats. But I want you to think about the touch fest and what you need to do to teach a dog to be touched all over and to help them be comfortable with it and be comfortable with moving and being loose and being repositioned, because that's going to be really useful for groomers and for vets. We don't want stiff. We want loose. So still should be loose, and helping them be loose and helping them be relaxed, which is also why cookies aren't necessarily a great idea. Many dogs are no longer relaxed once there's a cookie out, right? So any of those things that we're doing in early training should have the focus of we need to fade that out. I know sometimes trainers start thinking, well, what's the big deal? You're going to give them cookies. What kind of a maniac wouldn't have cookies in a grooming shop? But but the thing is that groomers, we don't necessarily know if the dogs in our shops are food aggressive, right? There's a wild card in there. And we don't know how the next dog is going to respond when they're up on a table and the dog across the room is getting food, or they start smelling food, right? We don't know what's going to happen. We don't know if that dog who's getting food is now suddenly going to lunge and growl at other dogs in the room if they walk past. And trainers, I think you need to know, groomers are walking dogs past, right? Okay, now I'm going to take Sparky off my table. I'm going to put Jojo up on my table. We're walking across the room. This is all very normal in a grooming setting. And if a dog is getting, licking peanut butter off of a surface while another dog walks by, that's not the time to find out that he's really aggressive about food. So it's not helpful in the grooming setting. What we want are some multi-purpose behaviors. So a dog who can be still and be loose and be guided into positions, turn to the left, turn to the right, lifting up their lips, getting in their mouth, looking in their ears, touching their toes, lifting their legs, lifting their tail. That's multi-purpose. The vet can use that. The owners can use that when they're wiping them down from rain. The groomer can use that. We can all use that and use that effectively. And the dog is learning that it's safe. That consent part is still there. Because if a dog chooses to wiggle away a little bit, we can address it at the point of wiggling, right? And when I talk about that point of consent being in my hand, so when I open my palm and the dog lifts their foot away, that tells me, okay, you're not ready. It doesn't mean a refusal, but it doesn't necessarily mean they're refusing. It means they're not ready, right? So help them be ready, right? Work on it instead of making a very elaborate kind of version of, I need you to do this thing and this thing and this thing to tell me that you're ready. Because like I said, a lot of the grooming settings aren't good for things like nose targeting and chin targeting, or I'm going to go to my mat to indicate that I'm ready, or I'm going to, get up on the table by myself to indicate that I'm ready. That's really not a good idea. So if you're training a dog to be groomed by their owner, sure, cool, do whatever. Right? I'll brush my dogs on my sofa. I'm at home. But if you're training them to be good for a grooming shop or for a vet visit, then we need some multi-purpose behaviors. The weekly action step this week is to look for times when a dog is not ready, when they just barely start to show that they aren't consenting, that they don't want to continue, because that is your training point, not when it becomes large, when it's very, very small. If you're doing it right, it's about as interesting as watching grass grow. This weekend, I am teaching behavior change strategies for the grooming table at the New England Grooming Show. So that's Saturday, October 12th. It starts at 2. It's a 1 hour. And I would love to meet people there. Hopefully you can be there. It's going to be a lot of fun. If you'd like to talk to me, you can find me through my grooming and training business, happycrittersdogtraining.com, my email, chrissy@happycritters.net, and through the Creating Great Grooming Dogs Facebook page. And we have these awesome devices in our pockets that allow us to do live video with each other. I can help you with the dog on your table. We can set up live lessons, and you may be surprised at how much we can get accomplished together via video.